Hello again everyone, Mary Rose here at Stitch Bliss Corner, and today I'm going to be talking about that great artist Matisse. Now I have my mother's crocheted blanket behind me. She had a great eye for colour, and Matisse's mother also had a great eye for colour. Now I'll get straight into it because I'm trying to make this so that it's not too long if possible. Now there might be a few jumps here and there in the video where I've had to cut a bit out or twiddle with something, or I might have said something incorrect. So just bear with me on that. I mean, I know myself, I don't like to see bits cut out when I'm watching a video. I do like it to be as uncut as possible, but sometimes it's not possible to do that. So anyway, without any further ado, we will carry on. Now, Matisse was born on the evening of December 31, 1869, in his grandparents' house in a town of Legato in the cheerless far north of France. That's what this person said. Turnip country. Apparently it's a lot of turnips were grown there. Flat, dark and wet. This area has been ravaged by wars over the centuries, and it is said that you had to be tough to live in this area, at that time at least, and not go under. It builds character, and the people of this region tend to be sturdy and resolute people. They have been called the uncomplaining plainsmen of the north. Now, Matisse's father set up a business there. Apparently, originally he was a linen sales, dealt with linen and that sort of thing. But eventually he opened a business as an apothecary, like a chemist, and a seed merchant. And part of the shop was household paints. And Matisse's mother used to assist customers there with their choice of colour, and she used to mix some of the colours of the paints as well. So I should imagine that Matisse would have been, introduced to colour at a pretty early age. Also, that particular area, it was famous for dyeing textiles to be sent to Paris for all the Paris, the fancy clothes and everything that the ladies wore and the laces and everything. So he would have seen a lot of colourful clothes, I would say, when he was young as well. He seems to have been happy-ish to follow the path chosen for him by his parents. So at 16 years old, he is described as being square-built, strong-jawed, in a conservative atmosphere. So he tended to go with the flow, I think, is what it sounds like when he was young. There was no indication that this young man would change the whole course of Western art. And twice in his lifetime he renewed the whole field of painting. Now, the first time was in 1905, which I shall get to, and the second time was when he was much older. And it was a case of necessity was the mother of invention for the second change in that he changed the direction of art. Now, so I'm just going through. Yes, apparently where he grew up, there were galleries that he could have gone to see famous painters and everything, but he had no interest whatsoever, and there's no evidence to say that he did go and visit those galleries and have a look at artists at all. Now, in the autumn of 1887, Émile Matisse sent his son to Paris to study law. That's what his father, he wanted him to be a lawyer. Matisse readily did his work and made great grades, and he doesn't seem to have been overly excited with living in Paris, saying that he spent his spare time with mediocre distractions. Mind you, I don't think Matisse was the sort of person that would give you his whole life story when you in conversation. He tended to be a little bit guarded about his personal life and what was going on. Now, in 1888, Paris was under the influence of artists like Seurat, pointillism, which I'll show you a picture of Seurat's work as we go along. Van Gogh was in Arles, producing sun-drenched and beautiful colours from the south of France. Now, I'm just going on now to he found law to be tedious, but he passed the bar in 1889 with distinction and began his practice. And now in 1889 Matisse began to paint. Now this happened after he suffered from appendicitis, and there is a little bit of conjecture also about he did have appendicitis, but also he tended to be a bit morose and depressed. And so, he just climbed into bed and basically didn't want to get out, I don't think, for quite some time. It took a long time. He was 20, and it took him quite some time to get over this appendicitis. Now, his mother looked after him during that time, and she gave him a box of paints and basically a DIY book on how to paint, and he just loved it. Must have been just one of those moments in his life where he was looking for something, to give him meaning, and or give his life meaning, and she turned up with these paints. And he said later, "From the moment I held the box of colours in my hands, I knew this was my life. I threw myself into it like a beast that plunges towards the thing it loves." Now, his mother always advised him not to obey the rules of art, but rather to listen to his own emotions. So she used to paint china as well. She was very artistic. So he was always watching what she was up to, which does, if you've got those tendencies, if someone else in the family is doing it, it just gives you another, spurs you on a bit. Now, his father was bitterly disappointed that his son turned his back on the legal profession. He told Henri that he would starve, but he did allow his son to go to Paris to study art and gave him a small allowance to allow him to do so. That was good of him. In 1891, Matisse returned to Paris at the Académie Julian, but he did not last long there due to the unbending syllabus. And I think that's what happened with quite a few artists that had a different approach to art. They did find the strict rules of the art schools very difficult, that have a week of drawing as an object, and then it was critiqued and everything, and they just got fed up with it. They wanted to get on, So anyway, he ended up going to the École des Beaux-Arts. Now, I'm sorry about my pronunciations here. If I remember, I'll get Harlequin to put the correct word in there so you can see, because I do apologise to anyone French that might be watching. Anyway, he was eventually permitted into the back of the class by Gustave Moreau. There's a story that Matisse tried to get into this exclusive academy that all the artists wanted to go to, and he just couldn't pass the entry. So he used to be outside the main gates showing his drawings and pictures to the lecturers as they arrived for work. But anyway, this Gustave Moreau eventually took pity on him, and he said, "Look, you can sit in the back of the classroom there, and I'll fix up with the administration at a later date." So he must have seen some kind of promise in the young Matisse. Anyway, Moreau did end up telling Matisse, "You were born to simplify painting." Now, Moreau was an artist also, and he was more inclined to allow his students to draw their subjects from life and get out into the streets and sketch. This was very unusual at the time, because most of the art teachers had strict rules of drawing and painting, and all was done in a studio setting. One thing Matisse did learn from the academy, Julienne, was the plumb line. His verticals are apparently always spot on in his paintings. That was the original academy he went to that he didn't last at. He did learn about, plumb lines and that sort of thing there. Now, Matisse began by painting still lifes and landscapes using a dark, muted palette. His most admired artist at that time was Chardin, who he slavishly copied. He copied the old masters and as was required, but he also was keenly following the painters who were going against tradition. He got a reputation amongst the other students as a bit of a rebel. In 1896, Matisse was elected as associate member of the Société Nationale, and in the same year he exhibited 5 paintings, 2 of which were bought by the state. So it shows that he was following the rules of painting at that time. There was a turning point in 1897 to 98 when he visited the painter John Peter Russell on an island off the coast of Brittany. Russell introduced him to Impressionism and the work of Van Gogh, who had been a good friend of Russell. From then on, Matisse's style changed completely. He said later, "Russell was my teacher, and Russell explained colour theory to me." I'll show you pictures and everything shortly. This is just to give you an outline of his life. Matisse had a 4-year relationship with his model, Caroline, also called Camille, and housekeeper. They had a child. I'm sorry about my throat. I think I might be getting a cold, so it's a bit gravelly. They had a child, a girl called Marguerite, whom Matisse brought up with his wife Amélie when he married. She came to live with them. Matisse met Amélie at a wedding because he broke up with Camille. Matisse met Amélie at a wedding where he happened to be sitting next to her. Her family were fairly well off and were free thinkers. They married 3 months after meeting. Amélie was a strong support for Matisse in his work journey, his artwork journey. She opened a hat shop, excuse me, to help support his work. She did this anchoring role for 40 years. In 1902, Amélie's family were financially ruined when they were innocently caught up in a fraud. Matisse helped with legal entanglements using his lawyer's credentials, but they lost everything as well. So they ended up back in Bohème, sorry about my throat, where he had lived as a boy. All of Matisse's children loved him very much, even though Matisse had great difficulty with getting his head round his work and his need for peace and quiet to achieve it. Somehow they were able to make allowances for their beloved father's eccentricities and deep need to express himself through his works. Now, he attended classes in clay modelling in 1899 for modelling and sculpture. He became influenced by Gauguin, Van Gogh, Paul Signac, but mostly Cezanne, to whom he said he owed the most. Most of his paintings from 1899 to 1905 were influenced by pointillism via his friend Paul Signac. He also went to London to study the paintings of J.M.W. Turner. Camille Pissarro suggested that he do that. Matisse was able to earn some money from painting a frieze for the World Fair at the Grand Palais in Paris. Railroads, steamships and the like meant that he could travel. His goal, he said, was to discover the essential character of things, to produce art of balance, purity and serenity. He set about disregarding perspective, abolishing shadows and challenging the accepted rules of line and colour. He was replacing the objective with the subjective. In 1905, Matisse went to the Catalan port of Collioure in the south of France with a friend, André Derain. 10 years his junior. He used a blend of pointillism style and Cezanne's technique to paint in a way of feeling the world with your eyes. In 1905, he was part of an exhibition that caused outrage, which I'll show you soon. Because of the number of nudes he painted, observers tended to think that Matisse was a sensual man obsessed with women, but that was not the case at all. He was a workaholic and a worrier, and he had breakdowns from time to time. He was just interested in the female form more than the sensual side of it. In 1906, he set up his home and studio in Paris. He was very methodical. He rose early, worked all morning, and a second work session after lunch, then violin practice, supper, and then bed. In 1907, Matisse's work was causing continuing consternation, and he was having trouble providing for his family. It is quite challenging, his work, especially in those times. The blue nude, which I have a picture here, I may as well show you now. This was of his wife, Amélie. Now, that was 1907. Some people reacted quite violently to this painting, and they saw it as being grotesque and crude. So this is what he was up against. It was burned in effigy in Chicago in 1913 by some art students. They were not impressed with it. An American photographer, Alfred Stieglitz, in New York, organized a showing of Matisse's work in his Manhattan gallery called 291, which introduced his works to the American public. Foreign buyers were keen to buy his works, but the French at the time could not understand him. Now, he did have patrons, Dr. Barnes, was it Alfred Barnes? The Steins, Gertrude Stein and her brothers, the Cohn sisters, who were wealthy sisters in America, and a Russian called Shukin. So that's that part anyway of his life, and we can go on with the rest later. Now, just to get a background of the times that he was living in, there had been huge leaps in technology by the late 1800s, and life was changing very quickly. There were steam trains, steamer ships to take passengers to new locations. The telegraph had been around since the 1840s. Radio was invented in 1895. The telephone in 1876. 1879, the light globe. Photography was becoming more popular. And I think there were artists too that were thinking, well, our bread and butter was to paint portraits of, the wealthy. Excuse me. And here we are, the cameras turned up. So I think a certain number of artists were looking for other ways of painting that would not be able to be replicated by a camera. Right, I'm going to go on to some pictures now, because I can do the second part of Matisse's life a bit later. Right, now here is a young Matisse with his mother, Madame Anna Louise Matisse, with her son Henri in 1889. When Matisse was in a post office line in Piccadilly, he said, To pass the time, I picked up a telegraph form and made a pen drawing of a woman's head. I drew without thinking of what I was doing, my pen working on its own, and I was surprised to recognize my mother's face with all of its subtleties. So that's that one. then here, now these prints, and I must thank Harlequin for all his hard work of printing all these paintings off for me and everything. But they're off the internet, and they're not great quality pictures, but it's just to give you an idea of what he was doing. So we've got, this is Woman Reading, 1894. Now this shows that he was taking his lessons, you know, he was listening to what they were telling him he was supposed to be producing at this time anyway. It's not a very good print of this early painting, but it shows the muted palette and somber tones, evokes a quiet calmness, though she is absorbed in that book. We've all been there. So that's that one. Now there he is on the coast in Brittany, and I think that might have been just before he went over to find out all about Van Gogh. Now, just for those who, I think I've got it here. It's just the influence of Gogh on Matisse. Gee, there's a sunflower when you need it. Can't believe that's not in there. Oh, I know, it's because I put the wrong book. Excuse me, I'm just looking for it. There it is. So there's a Van Gogh of sunflowers. And here's Matisse's Vase of Sunflowers. That's 1898, still life, oil on canvas. Believed to have been painted in Corsica, Matisse was influenced by bright light that was so much a feature of the south. And those sunflowers radiate the sun, don't they? So I think that did change a lot of artists' view of art when they went to the south of France. There was something about the light there that just excited their senses and got them getting out the bright paints and throwing caution to the wind a bit, I think. So here's another painting here, Still Life with Books and Candle, 1890. And you can see here that he could paint very well indeed if you're talking about traditional painting. Now this one here, the dinner table. Now this is where he's starting to venture off into other areas of art. Now I suppose really I should show you now the science of colour. The art world was starting to change. This is Seurat here. This one here is Signac, who was a devotee of Seurat. But see, that is actually tiny little dots of colour. That's the pointillism. And here is, that's a Seurat there and there. So Matisse was influenced by those artists, and also Van Gogh and Gauguin and Renoir, the Impressionists. And of course the Impressionists were a group of artists that tried to paint light and capture a moment in their paintings. See, the general public, when they went to art exhibitions in the Salon in Paris, they expected to see paintings like these here. You know, paintings from Greek mythology, quiet life in the countryside, portraits of various people of note, sylvan scenes, you know, and that sort of thing. That's the sort of thing they expected to see. And see how the paintings are all piled on top of each other. It was the big opportunity for artists to show their work. And they used to get prizes and things. And then people, whichever one was doing really well, people would be bidding to buy them. Now this one here, that was actually painted by Moreau, Matisse's teacher, sympathetic teacher. But as you can see, they're all very classical things. That's what they expected to see. And I'm showing you those pictures so that you can see or get a sense of the outrage that was to happen not too far away in 1905, when Matisse and some of his painting friends showed their exhibition of what they had to offer in room number 7, which I shall show you fairly soon. I'll just get these out of the way first. So the dinner table, 1897, was Matisse's first masterpiece, and he had spent the entire winter working on it. Though the Salon displayed the piece, they hung it in a poor location, disgusted by what they considered its radical impressionist aspects. Now, he painted this on the urging of his art teacher Moreau, who was greatly impressed with the decanters. He thought they, see, it's that perpendicular plumb line, I think. And Matisse said, when the dinner table was displayed at the Salon, Matisse said, you would have thought, referring to the wine carafes in the picture, that there were microbes at the bottom of all my decanters. People felt that the painting was not respectable. So I'll have to set a little pile up over here. Although I've got piles everywhere. Right. Now, anyone who doesn't want to see a naked picture of a man, avert your gaze. This is one, male model 1900, oil on canvas. It looks like a sculpture, doesn't it? Solidity and power comes to mind. So I think that's quite remarkable. It's just got this strength in those legs. Something about that picture. And then this is just to show you, this is the only other one that's a bit confronting, I suppose you'd say. But it is about art, after all. And it just shows Matisse with his model and just how close he became physically, how carefully and how much he scrutinized the female form. It looks more like a doctor's consulting room, actually. And he just used to do that. He was very methodical in the way he approached his work. That's just the way he did it. Now this is Notre Dame, 1902, and you can see that he's starting to depart from the realistic pictures that he was doing and getting more absorbed with planes of colour and the interaction of different colours. He did many views of Notre Dame from the balcony of one of his studios, and he removed fine detail. So there's that one. Now, he went on holiday with his friend, Paul Signac. That was the one I showed you the picture earlier on, The Science of Colour. And so he went on holiday with him. And this is Lux Calm et Volupté. I don't even know how to say that, the title of this. But anyway, it was considered the start of Fauvism. Painted when he was with Paul Signac, displayed at the Salon of Independence in 1905. That's the one that caused outrage. It was painted in the south of France in Saint-Tropez. The title means richness, calm, and pleasure. The figures are outlined in blue, and that would have been the Japanese influence on Matisse. Matisse had no interest in conflict or politics. He said of his art, "What I dream of is an art of balance, of purity and serenity, devoid of troubling or depressing subject matter." So, but you can see the influence of the pointillist. He does do little dots of colour, but he makes them more lozenge size. You know, he makes the bigger dots there. And he was interested in complementary colours, putting reds against greens and that sort of thing. Now here are the group of men that caused the outrage at the salon. And you have, there's Matisse. Now he was 10 years older than the others. So they, you know, he was seen as the leader of the gang. Then you've got this one, and that was Duran, then Vlaminck, and the last one in the line is Friesz, Friesz, Orlon, I think it's Orthon Friesz, his name was. Now, Matisse was seen as the leader because he was the eldest, around 35 years old. The others were in their mid-20s. All of the Fauves were influenced by Van Gogh. Vlaminck is said to have stated that he loved Van Gogh more than his own father. Unlike Matisse, who had a great respect for the old masters and repeated the Arcadian scene of women and figures dancing throughout his career, Vlaminck said that he had never been inside the Louvre. I think he was quite proud of that. I'll just show you some of their work. Now this one here is Duran. That's what he produced. Andre was 25 years old at the time his painting was rendered. This is a small fishing village in the French-Spanish border where he spent 2 months travelling with Matisse. So he travelled with him as well. Fine old time had by all, probably. This is the Vlaminck. It's just a riot of colour, isn't it? The Athenaeum houses at Chateau, 1905. Now, they were confronting enough for this little room that had been allotted to these fellows. But then the real eye-waterer, as you might say, was a picture that Matisse did of his wife. Now here's Amelie here in her hat. And this is the picture, oil on canvas, that Matisse produced. Now, people were just apoplectic about this painting. Now, it was called Woman with a Hat. It's now in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Now, critic Camille Maclaire stated, "A pot of paint has been flung in the face of the public." Leo, the brother of Gertrude Stein from Baltimore, and they were living in Paris at the time, called the painting the nastiest smear of paint he had ever seen, but he bought it. And they hung it on in their apartment in Paris. And the brush strokes are quite evident there. It was considered a watershed moment. It denied drawing, contour, light and shadow, and it is flat. The canvas showed through the paint. Now, I think he wanted that whiteness of the canvas to come through to give it a kind of a luminosity, I presume. But anyway, that's the one that really got people seething. But that was the influence of Cezanne in there, because that's Cezanne there, Madame Cezanne. And I think there's a certain amount of, the colouring in the face and everything. You can see how Cezanne did influence these young men with their art as well. Here's some more of Cezanne's portraiture. Of course, Cezanne copped a lot of criticism as well. But critics started to realise that this was going to be the future of art. So there were some critics that were more sympathetic towards these guys. Here's the Steins. Now, they were great patrons of Matisse. And this is Leo here. There's Gertrude, and that's Michael. And Michael was the one that he tended to look after the finances more. And these two tended to, well, I suppose they were investing. They bought an awful lot of painting. Now, here's another picture that was presented to the gallery, and it's called Open Window, a Collier, 1905. It's now in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Again, it's not a great print because the colours just aren't correct, but anyway. A view from his hotel room in Collier in south coast of France. Sailboats in the water. It is considered to be an icon of early modernism, saturated with bright unmixed colours and thick brush strokes and small strokes of colour. He uses complementary colours, green and red. And it's just all these pots of flowers and all this sort of thing, all this foliage around the window. And then the boats out in the ocean. It's really quite something. I mean, there isn't a photograph at the time anyway that could replicate that. And here's another picture of it, just so you can see what the actual window was like that he was painting. Now this one, View of Collier, 1905. Everything must be created anew, both object and colour. Blinding rays of the sun reflected off the building. He leaves areas of the canvas bare, white primer, which serves to make the colours look even brighter. Sorry, I had that off screen a bit. But there's those dabs of colour again in the brush strokes. Now there was another one that caused outrage, and that was this one. Madame Matisse, The Green Line, 1905. It's also called The Green Stripe. Details are minimised. Her hair is purple. There are complementary colours used. Somehow it works. I think it does work. There's a lot of character in that face. Now, I thought I had it written down somewhere, but anyway, the fauves, as they were, now they were called fauves from this exhibition because one art critic came along and there was a little statue in the middle of the room that was not related to the paintings, and he called it Donatello amongst the wild beasts. The wild beasts being all this crazy colour that, as he saw it, in all the paintings that surrounded this Renaissance little statue. And he sort of felt sorry for the statue to be stuck in the middle of the wild beasts. So that's where the term wild beast came from. Fauvism, or fauve, is wild beast in French. And the movement only lasted a couple of years, and these all artists all branched off into other areas of art, like expressionism and all that sort of thing. Now here are the Cone sisters from Baltimore, I think they were. And the sister, there's Dr. Clarabelle Cone and her sister Etta, and they were very financially well off as well. And Clarabelle, she was a bit of a trendsetter herself, because she trained and became a doctor. So, you know, they very much liked Matisse's work. Now here's a picture. This is where Matisse is starting now to try to simplify the human form. As you know, he got to a really what's the word? Well, he revolutionized how the human form is shown in paintings. You'll see what I mean. So here's this young sailor, 1906, oil on canvas. It was still in Collioure when this was painted. Now, that has relatively a fair amount of detail on it. Now, his second one, you can see where he's going here, how he has minimized detail. And this sort of seems a more powerful and memorable image than this one. I mean, I think that one's more calming. That would be nice to have on your wall, you know, if you lived near the sea or something like that. This one is different. This is Germaine Augustine Barthélemy Montage, an 18-year-old local fisherman. And, you know, the ear is just sort of, he's just put an ear in there. I mean, it's just amazing, really. So that's that one. Now, having said about how simple Matisse was showing his works, you know, like trying to simplify it all down, he does seem to like patterns and things. And I think that came from his youth, where he was surrounded by textiles and complex designs and things. And I don't think that ever left him, that love for that. You know, it's a Sunday here, and there's something going on out there. I don't know if there's a water main burst or something, but anyway, we'll press on. Now, this is another one of his paintings. Now, what have I got here? Still Life with a Red Rug, 1906. The rug is on the wall there. This is Expressionism. He was 37 when he painted this. Matisse had a great love of textiles and patterning all his life. Now, it says here he was already interested in, well, he's from generations of weavers anyway in his family. So he's already had an inborn appreciation of texture and design. He was supremely confident with scissors. Now, it says here, Matisse was known to be an avid collector of fabrics. From his days as a poor art student in Paris to the latter years of his life, when his Nice studio overflowed with Persian carpets, delicate Arab embroideries, richly hued African wall hangings, and any number of colourful cushions, curtains, costumes, patterned screens, and backcloths. Textiles soon became the springboard for his radical experiments with perspective. and an art based on decorative patterning and pure harmonies of colour and line. When he moved house, he also moved his fabrics, describing them as my working library. Well, that was his stash, wasn't it? He added to the collection all his life from markets in Algeria, Morocco and Tahiti. At the end of seasons, sales of Parisian haute couture. So he used to go to the sales and everything. I suppose his paintings were whips in a way. The revitalising spirit of Morocco would live in the artist's imagination until the cutouts of the artist's last years, which we will get to. So here's another one of his works. Now this is Standing Nude, 1907, oil on canvas. His colour palette is muted here. It is believed that this was painted from a photograph rather than a live model. Now this is a photograph here of the Paris apartment of Michael and Sarah Stein, and the green stripe lady is there. So that's Matisse and his patrons there having a nice get together. Now here is Matisse in his studio with his wife Amélie and his beloved daughter Marguerite. Marguerite was a great support to Matisse because he was a bit, well, he was prone to depression, and his paintings stressed him out a lot, you know. And she was the one that modelled most for him when he was with his family and everything. She was the one that he favoured. And she had diphtheria when she's about 6, and she had a tracheotomy for that. You know, where they used to have trouble breathing, and they used to have to put a tracheotomy in there just until the illness was over, and then it would, you know, heal up again. And he used to hide that scar. He used to just put little bands like a ribbon around or something like that in the paintings that he did of her. So here we are here. This is Joy of Life. Now this particular painting was inspired by Cezanne, and I will find that. It was a painting called The Bathers, 3 bathers. Anyway, it's just a little picture down there. But Matisse actually bought that painting. He went into debt to buy it, and he loved it. And there's one of his paintings based on Cezanne's painting there. This painting is nearly 6 foot high and 8 foot wide. It depicts an Arcadian landscape filled with bright trees, meadow, sea and sky, with nude figures interacting with each other. Note the dancing ring in the middle, that's there. The colour is emotional expression of the painter, not as nature is. The landscape was from Collier, where he painted looks. This is very much from his imagination and quite hedonistic. So that painting that I showed you before of the little dots of paint, this is the area where he painted this as well. Yes, I think this is where Matisse, he's not painting what is there. He's painting what he sees is there and what he feels about it. It's more about his feelings that he's trying to put on the canvas. And that's why he got so stressed out, because he just had great difficulty in doing that. So here we have the sculpture. You know, he did like sculpting, and this is he was influenced by Rodin. At one stage, Rodin was only round the corner from him, apparently. And so that's the original picture there. But Matisse, or sculpture I should say, but Matisse was not satisfied with that. He decided that it would be more powerful, to him anyway, with the arms removed. So that's what he did. He removed the arms. But those legs, I mean, I suppose you do tend to focus more on those because the arms aren't there. So then here's a picture of his daughter Marguerite. He gave this to Picasso in the autumn of 1907. Matisse called Picasso the boss, and Picasso called Matisse the magician. They had a mutual respect and rivalry. The band around her neck was to disguise the tracheotomy scar. Now apparently there were rubber-tipped darts that Picasso's students used to aim at this picture. They derided it quite a bit. That's just a story. Now, this is another one that the painting that I showed you, the Cezanne painting, influenced Matisse. Bathers with a Turtle, 1908, the St. Louis Art Museum in St. Louis, Missouri. Artists began to follow Matisse's example of moving away from three-dimensional art to simplifying images. This paradoxically made art a lot more complex. Matisse was influenced by African art. And there are three figures here all looking at a turtle. Strangely fascinating. Matisse did love animals, and he was known to stare at doves. And there's the little turtle down there. But I think some children, when they're absorbed in things, they do put their hands up to their mouth like that sometimes. But I'm not sure that, you know, I might be reading too much into that. Now this guy here, this is Sergei Shukin. Now this guy, he was a wealthy textile importer, and he had a passion for modern art. Well, with textiles and everything, that was his trade. So I suppose he saw a lot of, future designs in their work that he could use. He bought lots of Matisse's works. Parisians called him the Mad Russian. They basically said there was a madman buying the paintings and there was a madman painting them. Matisse travelled to Moscow to hang his works. Shukin had told Matisse excuse me, that he was a bit concerned about offending the ladies with having the canvases in such a public area. I'll show you the canvases shortly and you'll see why he says this. Around his spiral staircase, but he decided to go ahead anyway. All of Shukin's collection was confiscated during the Russian Revolution, but he escaped to France. But then I do have a little bit more information there. It says that Lenin expropriated Shukin's collection in person, but allowed Shukin to remain in servants' quarters as caretaker and guide. He died in Paris in 1936, so he must have left eventually. And there was Shukin's palatial home that he did have before the revolution, with all the artworks around the walls. And this is the painting that Shukin commissioned. He commissioned the two these are huge paintings that he had as he came down his staircase, that he was worried that the ladies might be offended by. But the movement that Matisse has in that picture, I can remember when I was about 16, I was just fascinated with this picture because of the movement. How he's done that is, I just, it's mind-boggling how he's done that. Now, this was, he asked for 3 large-scale canvases, Schuken, to go on his spiral staircase. What else have I got here? So I'm just trying to read it. Now, this is called La Danse, especially for Schuken, as part of a 2-painting commission inspired by a circular dance, perhaps a sardana, performed by fishermen of Collioure. So that's probably where Matisse got his inspiration for this. Now, the other one was this one, and this is called Music, 1910. This here looks blue, but actually it's green, that paint. I don't know why the printer's done that, but anyway. So it says here, this is also on a huge wall size scale and went with the dance for Schuken, the dance painting. Matisse painted this without any preparatory sketches, and modifications can be seen in the painting. This standing figure here, it could be a self-portrait because it's got the violin, and of course Matisse did play the violin. The standing figure, could be a self-portrait because he played the violin. It is once again a celebration of creativity. Now, critics called them lobstermen frolicking amongst the spinach, because I said this was sort of green. Matisse said that the space and shape between the figures was just as important as the figures themselves. And he always felt that about all of his work. Now, here's a picture of Matisse actually when he was visiting Schuken in one of his homes, or in his big home in Moscow, in front of one of his own paintings, The Woman in Green. That was in 1911. Now, this is Renoir's house, and there's Renoir there. And he used to, in his older age, he had terrible arthritis, and even to paint one brushstroke, he'd scream out in pain. And Matisse would sort of, be really concerned about him. But Renoir said, it's worth it in the end. Even though it's very painful, it's worth continuing to work. So, Greta Brazard and Auguste Renoir, standing. Claude Renoir, Matisse, and Pierre Renoir. Of Renoir, Matisse said, "The mind of Renoir, through his modesty as well as his confidence in life, once the effort is made, allowed him to reveal himself through all the generosity he was provided with, stripped of its reconsiderations. This aspect of his work makes us see an artist upon whom the greatest gifts were bestowed, and who has the gratitude to respect them." He could have been speaking about himself there. Now here are Matisse's parents, Emile and Anna. His father was grain merchant, and part of the business was mixing paints, as I said before. And I think it's just the influence of that mother on Matisse, and how times have changed. I think those might be fox furs that she's wearing there. They never do that today. Now here's another version of the repeated theme of the dance. He was fascinated with the arabesque movement in ballet and everything. And they're almost floating, those figures. And here the painting is in the background, and he's still life with the dance, 1909. This is on in one of his studios. The table is turned so that the corner moves sharply into the depths of the painting and focusing the eye on the dancers on the easel. This is in Moscow, this painting. You can see how the painting does turn, and it gives a depth to the picture, doesn't it? Now this is a very famous one here. This is called the Red Studio. Now Matisse is, he had quite a few art studios and none of them were red, but this is his take on a particular studio. The Red Studio, 1911, brought one artist to tears. His artworks are detailed and coloured, but the studio itself and the walls and the furniture are suggested only by negative gaps scraped into the canvas. The grandfather clock has no hands, as if the whole room is suspended in time. Then there's the white window here. Where I got the colour red, to be sure, I just don't know. I find all of these things only become what they are to me when I see them together with the colour red. And it's as though he's saying that his art is his life's blood. It's like it's just floating. And there's that young sailor up there on the wall, and he's got his various paintings stacked there. And these, see the furniture here. Sorry, this is where he's scraped. He's taken the back of his brush and scraped so that the underneath layer is come through the red, which suggests the shapes of the furniture. Look at his little pencils there. It's really, yeah. So that's the Red Studio. Then here is Matisse and his wife in Morocco. He decided to go over there to get a bit of inspiration. And there are some paintings here that he did in Morocco. Now, he was quite fascinated by these smokehouses that the local men used to go to. And they used to have, apparently, fish bowls and the hookah pipes, and they used to smoke on those and look at these fish. Maybe it was for relaxation or something. This is Zora on the Terrace, 1912, oil on canvas. Matisse took 2 working trips to Tangier, 1911 to 13. He was fascinated by a different culture, and the colours of Morocco must have thrilled his senses. Zora is posed outside, and there is a goldfish bowl there, and there's her little slippers. And so there was that one. And there are the men lying around looking at the goldfish bowl. Now this one here is Madame Yvonne Landsberg. This is 1914, and sgraffito is the method used here where he scraped and got the undersurface of the painting that's underneath. He's sort of scraped away to show the underneath part that was layered before. Now, her brother is quoted as having said, because she sat for Matisse, that the first sitting, Matisse painted a striking likeness of his sister, but as the sittings went on, the features became more like a Byzantine icon, Physically, it became less of his sister, but more spiritually her. Her parents did not buy the painting. But I mean, a lot of portrait artists, they do try to paint the person, not necessarily what they look like. Some of the best paintings are like that, apparently. Now, this is the one painting that came as close to abstract that Matisse ever got. He didn't like to be called an abstract painter, and he tried to avoid that name. This is French Window at Collier, 1914. It is a night sky, there it is, and 3 bands of colour to frame it. It's quite a calming view. Matisse said that he believed art should be stripped down to its essentials, simplifying an image like you might prune a tree. Some critics, though, say that this painting is one of the few that reflected the uncertainty that surrounded Matisse at this time, of course, World War I. So, yes, that did unsettle him a lot. And here is a picture of his son, Pierre. And you can see Matisse has departed from his usual palette of colours and brightness to these greys. And this is called The Piano Lesson, 1916. So he's in the war now, World War I. It is painted in the living room of Matisse's home just outside Paris, with one of his sons, Pierre, at the piano. In the upper right, is one of Matisse's paintings. That's this here. Woman on a high stool. Pierre loathed piano lessons, and the child's misery is etched on his face. But actually, Pierre was much older when this painting was rendered, and some critics say that it is a metaphor for World War I. Note the big V notch in the face, mourning the loss of youth to war. And I've got a close-up of that face for you. I do apologise for my throat. I do think I'm getting a cold. You can see the great plunge in that face there. This is Michael Stein posing for Matisse. And this was in 1913, and he was financially comfortable at this time. You know, one exhibition, it sold out just like that, you know. I mean, he's just, regardless of what the general public felt, there were plenty of people that were very interested and got joy from his works. Now this one here is self-portrait, 1918. Oil on canvas. The colours are flat and simple, and depth is suggested by the shapes of the objects within the painting. Depth is also achieved by Matisse's body overlapping the wash basin. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? To be able to do depth and everything with no shadows, you know. I mean, it's really quite amazing what he did. And the outlines, again, reflecting the Japanese influence. Now, after he went to Morocco, he went with a friend, and they went to some of the brothels, and it was to get, Matisse went with the artists. He wanted to just, get material for his painting. And his friend said, oh, I don't, not that keen in going into these places. And he said, look, just pretend we're doctors and going on a house call. So it wasn't until 10 years later that he actually painted from the experiences in Morocco of the odalisque. Now, the odalisque is a tradition of painting, and I'll just show you Ingres's one, and then you'll get the idea. Couldn't find it in the book, but anyway, this is the odalisque, Ingres, quite a celebrated one. So that's that image there. And so Matisse decided to do some of those. So when he was 50, Matisse leaves his family and goes to live in Nice. Well, I mean, he didn't leave them forever. He just took off for a while, which, you know, a lot of artists did that. He celebrated his love of colour and patterns and textiles that harked back to his childhood in the village of Picardy, where great coloured fabrics and laces were made. My role is to lend calm, because I myself need calm. He was sombre and anguished. His nurse used to read to him at night. His misery was a comfort to him in his bed. A lion with velvet paws, but still a lion. So this is with his model Zita, dressed in odalisque fashion, 1927 to 28. And there she is there. And there he is, being fairly close proximity there and doing his sketches. So here are some of his odalisques. Odalisque in red, culottes, 1921. Ingres, well, yeah, I showed you the Ingres painting. Matisse was fascinated by Morocco and the colours, the different culture to his own, the semi-naked women in the brothels, and then their bright clothes, the furnishings and the rich rugs and carpets, which he's got plenty of all that in there. And this one, decorative figure, 1925. To me, the shape of the shoulder there, that's almost like a chair to me. It's almost like she's part of the furniture. Just saying. Look at all the patterns there. Small odalisque in a purple robe. Pianist and checker players, 1924, oil on canvas. This is in a private collection. Once again, Cezanne's influence is there. There's a Cezanne painting. This is Matisse's Nice apartment. And his favourite model at the time, at the piano, Henriette Delacroix. Her two brothers are playing checkers. Matisse's own family stayed in the family home during the times he travelled to various studios to paint. Now, how does he suggest a calm of such an atmosphere of such calm and serenity, with all those patterns going on in there? I don't know how he did that. I think adding white helps, you know. Now, this is a very large painting, and this is in Russia, in the Hermitage Museum. The Painter's Family, 1925. Matisse's wife is in the left distance here, wearing yellow. Pierre and Jean are playing checkers, and Marguerite, his daughter, is the figure in black. The figures are more simplified than the heavily patterned background, aren't they? Well, yes, they are. So, that's that one. Matisse went to New York, and he really liked it there. He felt that Americans were more receptive to his works, and most of his patrons were American. And the thing was, I mean, he copped it. He copped it all the time through his life, derision and everything. It must have been very hard for him because he was just doing what his heart told him to do. He wasn't doing it to cause controversy. It's just the way he saw things. Here he is studying a swan. He drew every day. He also wore a blindfold for drawing practice, saying that it helped him to feel the lines. He used to just practice. And before he started something, he'd be waving his arm around, imagining the line before he actually put it onto the paper. And here he is in Tahiti. And he said that the Tahiti light, it was like a gold goblet of colour. He said he didn't like the light in Tahiti. It was too yellow for him. But he did like, he enjoyed swimming with the fishes and all the rest of it. But the light didn't really inspire him too much. Now this man here is Albert C. Barnes. And he was an American millionaire who commissioned Matisse to paint some murals for his, I think it was referred to as a house museum. His house was so huge. And Matisse did do that. He rented a studio. He lived in Nice a lot. When Matisse first arrived in Nice, apparently it rained for a month and he didn't like it. But then the sun came out and he fell in love with the place. And when he was commissioned to do these murals for Dr. Barnes, he rented a movie studio that has plenty of space, so that he could sketch out the murals that he was going to be doing. And he worked on them for a year. And I don't know if he went over to see Dr. Barnes or whatever happened. Anyway, they went over there and they were the wrong size. He miscalculated. So then he had to go back to the drawing board and start again. But he added a couple of figures to the work the second time. So here, just don't take any notice of that. It's just this bottom down here. That is what he did for Dr. Barnes's studio, or not studio, his house. And see how there's those archways there, and he sort of worked the figures into the space. And there's another picture here that shows it. There's Dr. Barnes's doors, and the figures are above. Oh, sorry, is that right? Yeah. I didn't realise they were like that. Sorry, for some reason I thought they were on ground level, but obviously they're above. Yeah. And Dr. Barnes didn't show them off. He just shut the room up and no one saw them, apparently, for a long time. Woman in a purple coat. I'm just showing you some pictures now before we get on to the final part. Large red interior. This is the last major painting that Matisse attempted. It is included in the series of Vincent interiors at a time when the artist created some of his greatest works. This is in 1948. This one, interior with an Egyptian curtain. The colour radiates the sunshine. The more you simplify the image, the more you increase the expression and power of its colour. That text was from Artifactory. The Lute, oil on canvas. And now we come to the second part of Matisse's career. Now, in 1940 or 1941, Matisse was diagnosed with cancer of the colon, and he had to have an operation that saved his life. But he did say to the doctors, look, can you try and give me 4 years, to finish my work and everything. And he became very tired and exhausted after this surgery. It took him a long time to recover. And even when he did recover, he was confined mostly to a wheelchair and to a bed. So his work, you would have thought that any other person would have thought, well, that's it, I'll just sit and read a book and look at my birds now. But he wasn't about that. He just was a workaholic. And into his life in 1939 came a young woman that was to become a great help to him after his illness. Now, Amélie had his wife. She was starting to become a little bit infirm. And so there was a requirement for an assistant in the house. And Amélie took on this person, Lydia Delacroix. Now, Lydia, I'll just give you a little bit of an idea of her. She well, see, that says 1935 that he did the painting, so it must have been earlier than 1939. Oh, sorry. No, but she did come into his life in that, around, must have been around 1935, because this is a picture of Lydia here. This is a painting of her. New Rose, 1935. So anyway, let's see what it says here. She could have been a doctor like her father. He, a respected pediatrician in Tomsk in Siberia, but he died of typhus and her mother of cholera in 1922, leaving her an orphan at 12. She was brought up by her aunt and left Russia to escape the revolution. She was accepted for medical studies in the Sorbonne, but could not afford the fees. She married young, but the marriage lasted only a year, and she moved to be part of the Russian émigré community in the south of France, trading on her looks as a film extra, dancer, and model. She had no money, and after 6 months of helping Matisse with his huge mural, The Dance, she was given 500 francs by Matisse to make a new start. But her husband blew the lot one night at the casino and left. When Matisse found out she was taking part in dance marathons to repay the debt, he was both horrified and impressed. It was the beginning of one of the most fruitful partnerships in art. Despite his sedate appearance in later life, Matisse was a driven man, seething to paint, and so on and so forth. By 1930, when Matisse had achieved financial security, Amélie had already retreated into invalidism. Delacroix was hired to look after her, and 3 years later, Matisse asked her to model. So there you go. As a blonde ice princess, she was unlike anyone he had painted before, and he was so impressed. Matisse impressed her as the first painter she had met who did not try to get her into bed. Matisse was far too committed to painting to waste time and energy having sex with his models. He was 40 years older than her. Now, from the cancer operation in 1941, which he was not expected to survive, Lydia provided Matisse with the calm, support, and comradeship that enabled him to continue at the top of his creative powers. Remembering her father, she likened Matisse to a doctor, totally absorbed in his work. Lydia, without her, it's unlikely there would have been the brilliant flowering of his cut-out shapes for which he is now perhaps most remembered. She coordinated works on a church that Matisse designed and put together. and it was very productive relationship, but exclusive of the Matisse family. They didn't get involved at all with Lydia, so they sort of kept their distance from her. Let's see, although this part of right, so anyway, she's well worth acknowledging, because without her, the second part of Matisse's career would not have happened, I don't think. Or it might have, but it wouldn't have been anywhere near as productive as it was. So she was from Siberia. She could have run an army. She had amazing capacities. She ran the studio, she organised the models, she dealt with the dealers, salespeople, the gallery. Everything worked like clockwork. So anyway, at one stage, Madame Matisse was very annoyed. I think it was because for the first time in her life she did feel a bit threatened by this young girl. Not because of any sexual dalliance, but just because of the way that they seemed to be two sides of the same coin, Matisse and Lydia. They connected on a totally different level to how he connected with Amélie. And Amélie basically said, well, you have to choose between her or me. And he chose Amélie. But when that happened, Lydia tried to shoot herself in the chest, or did, but apparently it didn't damage her too much. But Amélie had had enough anyway. She wanted a divorce, so they did separate. I don't know if I suppose they divorced. I'm not sure about what happened in those days. But anyway, Amélie had had enough. And in a way, it was probably better that way, because Amélie couldn't have helped him the way this girl did with his work. And at that stage, maybe Amélie just wanted to sit and contemplate a navel and not worry about him so much. So here's Lydia here. And even with overalls, she's got this sense of style, hasn't she? She's got the little high heel shoes. She was his carer and his assistant. She was a muse also. Here she is with turpentine. Matisse used to have his work rubbed off at the end of each day, apparently in a quest for simplification of form. So this is interesting, because that's the model that's her in the picture, and she's there. She's got the turpentine there, and she's just scraping off some of it. So there she is, and here she is, young woman in blue blouse, 1939. And of course, in the war years too, she used to go out on her bike and find food and everything for them. I mean, you know, it was occupied France. I mean, and she did an awful lot for him. She was very selfless. Lydia in front of a window in Vence. She was a very lovely woman. And here's Matisse at that time. Here she is again doing some more work for him. In 1932, at the age of 22, this beautiful girl was employed by Matisse's wife to assist him as he cut out paper silhouettes for Dance 2, a mural commissioned by the wealthy Albert C. Barnes. Well, actually, she was first employed, I think, to look after his wife rather than him. And here's another portrait of Lydia, which is amazing. 1947. It's getting more and more avant-garde. He also put a book together called Jazz, and here's some page out of that book. called Matisse and the Art of Jazz, 1947. Here's Icarus, from the book that Matisse put together. Of course, Icarus was a figure from mythology that tried to fly. He put feathers on his arms, stuck the feathers together with wax, and he flew too close to the sun and the wax melted and he fell to earth. But I think the emphasis of the weight pulling him down, the size of those thighs. I mean, these look simple images, but they're so hard to do. And I mean, the arms are almost like wings, aren't they? It's the simplicity of it. Another picture of him. A rare one, apparently. He's smiling there. He must have got him on a good day. I really like that one. He said, if my story were ever to be written truthfully from start to finish, it would amaze everyone. And here's one of his vast. These are paper cutouts, and I'll get to that. I'm just showing you them as they come along, because this is the next stage of his art that he went to, because he found that he couldn't paint anymore because of his physical infirmities. So instead of that, he did paper cutouts. And here's some of the images. This is Blue Nude, 1952. Blue Nude, 1952, another number. Gouache painted paper on paper canvas. And what he used to do, he used to get big sheets of paper and get his assistants to paint it the colour that he wanted. And then he would cut it out with these huge scissors. And he was like a man possessed once he got those scissors in his hand. There he is sculpting there. Venus la Coquille. It was bronze in the end. And then he was asked by a nun for help for a stained glass window. And it turned out that the nun had been a nurse that had looked after him after he'd had his cancer surgery. And she was a nurse then, but she took the cloth, she took the veil and became a nurse. And there she is there. And he had been born a Catholic, but, you know, it was believed that he was an atheist, but I'm not sure that he was. So he put this church together. That's the outside of it. The entrance is at the left, and the other side has a row of domed windows. There's the roof. So even the roof is gone to great detail. And there he is there. Looking at his work. Excuse me. Now, because of his infirmity, he used to get a bamboo pole and put charcoal on the end to do his pictures. He did that with the one that he did for Dr. Barnes as well. He used to stand there and do it just like that. And this is where he's doing the stages of the cross. He's just putting that inside the church there. And what he did, he did these drawings, and then they were divided up in squares and made into ceramic tiles, and the tiles were applied to the walls. So you can see the tiles there behind, you know, that make the figure up. And there's the stained glass window there and the altar. And it's all plain white in there, but the light comes through and colours everything. They say it's absolutely beautiful. And I do have a book on Matisse, but I mean, this is just getting a very long video. There's his stained glass windows. And see how the colour comes in through the light. It's like walking into one of his paintings. I think that's what someone said. And here he is with one of his beloved cats. This one had an M on its forehead, and he said that was for M for Matisse. Now, I'm going to just wrap this up, I think. I might do, if anyone wants me to, that might be the best idea. If anyone wants me to, I will go through the book that I have on Matisse, just like a flip through, to finish, you know, to finish the subject of Matisse off, because this video will be too long to do that as well. I mean, it's just too much, especially as my voice is petering out. So I think I'll just finish this. I'm just going to show you a few more pictures, and you know, that'll be that. There's Lydia again in a Romanian blouse. There he is, actually in his bed, still sketching. He draws a head for the decoration of the Chapelle du Rosary, that's the name of the church, in his studio room hotel in Hotel Regina in Nice in 1950. So he's just practicing there. I suppose Lydia had to get up on the ladder and rub it out later. And there he is. What must have been in an earlier time when he was painting. And here is a famous one that's very beloved. This is called The Snail. And it's huge. It's massive. It's gouache on paper, cut and pasted. Matisse sketched snail shells in his studio. He has arranged complementary colours alongside each other to create vibrancy. So there is a spiral there. So that's the snail. This one is called The Parakeet and the Mermaid, 1952. And there is the parakeet, and there's the mermaid. And there he is in his wheelchair with his big pair of scissors and all his bits underneath. And there is a short clip on the internet of him using these scissors. Now this one is called The Swimming Pool, 1952. And he went on a trip to a pool to see the swimmers and enjoy, but it was so hot. Matisse said that he should just go home and he would make his own swimming pool. He asked his assistant to place on the wall a white paper frieze, 5.5 feet, and he cut blue paper forms of sea creatures and human figures and waves, and they were pinned there by his assistants. So this is not a good picture of it, but anyway, that's the swimming pool. There he is in bed with his cat again, working hard. And apparently there was a painting that he asked he could borrow from Picasso, and he put this painting up at the foot of his bed so he could see it all the time. And Picasso asked, you know, waited the decent amount of time you would for a friend, asked for it back, and he said, "Oh, I haven't finished looking at it yet." So there's a self-portrait, 1939. A coloured picture of him in his bed. With one of his beloved doves. And one of these doves he gave to Picasso, and Picasso used that dove for the symbol the peace dove symbol for the United Nations. And there he is. See how he's looking at that bird there and drawing it. He used to stare at doves, and the doves used to stare back. And here's Lydia attending to him once again with the selfless determination that girl had. Quite remarkable. And there is the peace dove that Picasso used one of Matisse's models for. In later years, Matisse said, "I have worked for years in order that people might say, it seems so easy to do. When asked if he believed in God, he answered, yes, when I am working." And here's the last little bit here. The picture I just showed you of Lydia. Yeah. With him. Matisse died on November 3rd, 1954. He was 84. The day before, Lydia had come to his bedside with her newly washed hair wound in a towel turban, accentuating the classical severity and purity of the profile Matisse had so often drawn and painted. He sketched her with a ballpoint pen, holding the last drawing he ever made out at arm's length to assess its quality before pronouncing gravely, "It will do." And Lydia had a suitcase that she'd had packed for 15 years. And she picked up the suitcase and she left. She left the funeral arrangements to his family because she correctly surmised that they probably didn't really want her to be there. And then she wrote books, like, she lived into her 80s, and she bequeathed a lot of his paintings to her home country, which is where they are today. So I think she certainly deserves her moment in the history of art, because the cutouts that was so big, that he's mostly remembered for, there's so much of it he owed to her. They made a very good combination. Anyway, that is Matisse. As I say, I do have another book here that I could do a flip through if anyone is interested. Otherwise, I won't do it if no one is. So until next time, thank you for your time and all the best from Mary Rose.